Review code provided by Reckoner Industries. Hello and welcome to Level With Us, the show where we have a cozy video game discussion every week. This week we've got a little episode about The Signal State, which you can find on Steam. This game was developed by Reckoner Industries and published by the Iterative Collective and Indie Nova. So The Signal State is a very specific type of game, and Marcus has been the main one who's played it, and there's a good reason for that. So to start things off, I'm bringing back an old segment we haven't done in a while. Marcus, what is even happening?
I don't miss the segment because sometimes it can be hard to put the premise of games in words. But Signal State is a puzzle simulation game where you use signal flow and or modular synthesis to complete tasks. And there is a story in which you're in kind of a post-apocalyptic world where you're retrying to build the technology on an old farm, I think is what it is. And so modular synth is basically what this game is. You have to try to complete tasks like send output 1 to input 1, but only send output 1 when input 2 is at 100 volts, etc., etc. A lot of voltage type puzzles.
So it's kind of a programming game, but it's specifically modular synthesis. And for those who don't know what that is, including myself, how would you describe what modular synthesis is?
Yeah, so, oh boy. So modular synth basically is the idea of certain signals dictate certain parameters. So like we know pitch. So like let's say you have one thing where it's like if you get a high number, play a high pitch. If you have a low number, play a low pitch. But then what you can also do is take signals and plug them into other signals. So like you might have an LFO, which is basically an oscillating. This is gonna. Oh man.
Do you have a better description for my monkey brain? I don't think we've described that modular synthesis is a musical kind of thing, right?
Yes.
This is a music game, sort of. It's a programming game, but it's also a music game.
Yeah, and I should preface one of the reasons I'm having trouble difficulty. One of the reasons I'm having trouble describing it is because I'm actually not super familiar with modular synthesis or signal flow or electrical engineering or anything like that. So I just have a little bit of knowledge. I guess if I just try to give the most basic of definitions, modular synth lets you create music in kind of more of a tactile, electrical way. Rather than hitting a note on a keyboard, you're plugging in different signals and modifying them based on other signals. So a lot of people who do modular synthesis, they do it to have these like randomized, almost what you would think of as procedurally generated, except it's all intentional, and the randomness they introduce is intentional.
Very interesting. And we'll be playing some tracks in the background of this that were created with the Signal State to kind of demonstrate what Marcus is talking about. And by the way, a question. You said the story is like you're trying to rebuild this technology on a farm. In the universe, is it modular synthesis, or is it like, no, this is like life-saving, post-apocalyptic equipment that will save our lives kind of thing, but it takes the form of a modular synthesis?
You know, at least as far as I've gotten, it's nothing so much life-changing or life-saving. It's more mundane, but it is applying modular synth to other things. So it's like, oh, this is a crop sorter, or this is a transmitter, or stuff like that. And you can sometimes loosely see a connection, but usually it's mapping kind of the signal flow puzzle to some other technology.
Okay, that's kind of cool. So it's like they've built a game around something that wasn't necessarily a game before. Like there are objectives in this, but there's also a sandbox mode, which you've played around with. And the sandbox mode came out very recently. It was a brand new update. It's one of the reasons the developers were giving out review codes. But let's talk about like the mission modes first. Did you enjoy them? Like, are these fun puzzles?
Yeah, absolutely. This game reminded me of Human Resources Machine. I believe that's what it's called, by the same people who made World of Goo, if you remember who those developers are.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are other games like this, but that game is kind of a programming game where it's having you use these systems to solve problems, and you're kind of learning programming principles as you do it. This is very much like that. And I find that usually the difficulty curve is good. Like, it will throw kind of a curveball that you can't solve as easily as you might expect. You know, like, oftentimes there'll be like an objective where you're like, oh, that's easy, I'll just do this. But you realize you don't have the tools or the modules to do that simple solution. So you have to find workarounds. And I felt the same way in Human Resources Machine. Occasionally I would just hit like a hard wall. Like, I'd burn through, 5 puzzles, easy. And then one of them, for whatever reason, I just cannot bend my brain to figure out the correct solution. And it even has like a hint system. But one time, like, the hints were giving me all of the things I did know. And at that, one thing I think is kind of cool is it says, ask for help on Discord. And it links you straight to their Discord page. So you can like ask for other people in the community's help with stuff like that. But yeah, does that make sense? It's giving you objectives, and along the way, you're slowly being introduced to new modules and new ways of interacting with signal flow.
Gotcha. I think it makes a little more sense when you see the visuals for what this game looks like. Mm-hmm. Basically, you have these racks of mounted outboard gear, which is something I am a little familiar with as an audio engineer, because we have something called a patch bay, where we route audio sources from one, source to another. So when we record someone, we got to make sure, the mic is connected to the computer, it's going through the computer or through a preamp, which boosts the signal and then goes through the computer, kind of thing. And so we have these metal racks that all of these different types of gear are mounted in, and then there's a patch bay that connects them with cables. And that's kind of what this game looks like, is a bunch of different pieces of equipment. They look like physical equipment that you mount and then connect using cables. And I've seen some screenshots with some insane cable wiring all over the place, routing one thing to another, before finally going to the output kind of thing. And that's something I liked about this game, even though the very earliest puzzles kind of bent my brain. The visuals I found really satisfying. Like, I just love that physical equipment feel of connecting one thing to another. I thought they nailed that. As someone who is adjacent to people who work in music and synthesizers.
Yeah, I think that they designed the interface pretty well. My only little complaint would be sometimes scrolling down, because I would have to have multiple rows of stuff. I would accidentally scroll over some knob or something and change a parameter that I didn't want to change.
Oh, whoops.
They do have at the bottom a way to lock dials and lock cables so you don't accidentally undo or change them. But usually I'm scrolling and I'm still actively changing stuff, so I would just accidentally change something that I didn't want to change. But yeah, no, I also like the look and feel. You can change the color of your cables or set it on rainbow, so you can be as organized or as sporadic as you'd like to be with them. The thing about this kind of stuff is it quickly becomes overwhelmingly complicated looking. I could explain how I did something, but if you just look at it, it looks like the chords underneath the computer that get super tangled and stuff like that.
Right. Does this game do a good job teaching you how synthesizers work? Could you describe this game as an educational game?
I think so. As I understand it, compared to other actual music making applications or physical gear, this is limited in a lot of ways, because ultimately what you're working with in this game is numbers from negative 100 to positive 100. But yeah, I think it could count as educational just because me playing through it, I felt like I understood the concepts better than I ever have. For example, you'll hear certain phrases like sample and hold a lot when you're dealing in synthesizers. And I didn't really know what that meant, but this helped me figure out what it meant. don't know how much to get in depth, but yeah, I think that it does teach.
So do you think this could teach a non-musician how to make music with a synthesizer?
So I didn't really say this before, but you're not actually making music so much in the beginning of these missions or the campaign mode. It's looking for certain outputs that are usually just random values. So you're using the tools of like modular synthesis, but if you want to like actually make music, you got to go to the sandbox mode. So I think this game might be difficult for people who don't have like a really programming based mind, I guess. Or logic. I guess it's more logic than programming. It's like if-then statements, and/ors, nors, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I do think that someone with little to no experience could still pick this up if they were dedicated, if they were interested in it.
Yeah, I think you have to have an interest to get in kind of... This seems like a very, very niche type of indie game. I've seen a lot of praise for it, but I think this appeals to those who are into synth or who want to get into it.
Right.
Which is really cool. I think it's cool that games have just expanded to cover all sorts of interesting themes and teach all sorts of interesting things.
For sure.
So who would you recommend this game to? If you had to recommend it to anyone, what type of person would enjoy this game the most?
Good question. I think that people who have listened through this probably already know if this is the kind of game that they would enjoy. If you're interested in dabbling in modular synth, or if you're kind of fascinated by logic puzzle games or kind of process-based, using components to reach some objective, it's a very cool game. I was actually also introduced in kind of looking at different reviews and comments about this, that there's a website called Zachtronics that has a few games that are kind of similar to this in that they are logic-based or programming-based games. One of them actually looks very familiar to Signal State in that it has a patch bay kind of looking theme where you're patching components into other components or modules into other modules.
Wow.
So that's another place for people to explore if this is the kind of game that they like.
Awesome. Well, we'll include a link to the Steam page in the comments, and if you decide this game is right for you, Marcus's recommendation, and Marcus has played with synths all his life, so I think it's a recommendation from him is pretty high praise, in my opinion. Speaking of which, I have a little who's the fake fan question.
Fire away.
Fake fan?
So since we're talking about synths today, and since I didn't have very much to contribute to this discussion, I thought I would draw upon my personal experience of little songs that Marcus used to send me using his Nintendo DS synthesizer.
Yes.
I have with me here Marcus's original DS Lite that he left with me for safekeeping. And along with it, a few interesting little games. One of them is WarioWare DIY, and one of them is Korg DS10 synthesizer. Explain to the listeners what these are. What is Korg?
Oh man, if I can't explain Signal State, I don't know if I can explain these, but they're essentially monophonic synths, meaning that you can have 16 different patterns, is what they call them, or 16 different loops, where you have two different synths. So basically, it's like a little 8-bit piano that you can kind of record and make different sounds with.
Right you are. And I have a couple of them pulled up here that I'm going to play, just kind of in front of my microphone. And the fake fan question is, this will determine whether you're a fake fan of yourself, Marcus, because I'm going to play one of the synths you built or one of the songs you made, and you have to guess what you labeled it.
Yeah, so I will say that the labels came sometimes early on in the process, so I don't really associate them by their name. Also,
Fair,
I do
fair.
have a SoundCloud that you could pull these off of if you wanted.
Oh, well, let's link to that SoundCloud as well.
Okay.
We'll start with something a little easier, I hope. Any guesses?
Well, I had you name this one Jello City. I don't know if I labeled it as such in the game. Is it Jello City?
It is, yes. It's labeled Jello
Okay, sweet.
in the game. But yes.
I think that is the first. That is the first one I made.
That was the first one on the list here. So, well done. Yes, I did help name that one, which is kind of fun. Okay, I'm going to play two others.
Okay, so don't judge me on this one. The reason it sounds so weird is because each of the notes are mapped to different moves in a famous game of chess. So the reason it's all over the place is, knight to e5 is E in the 5th octave. That's the reason it's so all over the place. So I don't know what I called it. Did I just call it chess?
You did. It was called chess.
Oh, sweet. Did you know that, Jared? That's where it came from?
No, I was curious. It just had the title chess on it, so I was wondering what you were doing with it.
You're like, this sounds bad. Huh.
What famous chess match was it?
Oh, dear. Probably Kasparov versus Deep Blue, but I don't know for sure. That was high school days, man. I thought I was so cool. I thought I was making experimental music.
That is really cool. Who would think of that? That's awesome. All right, here's the next one. Okay, what was that called?
So the whole point of all of that is every single one of those patterns is a different number of beats in the measure. So like 7, 11, 15. I don't know what I called it. I probably called it something making fun of it like odd or weird or gross or something like that. What is it called?
It's called chaos. So
Oh.
I think we'll give that one to you.
Odd, weird, gross, chaos.
Pretty impressive to me that you made these years ago.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and thanks for talking with me this week.
Yeah. Maybe we'll close out the show by playing a DS synthesizer song that you're proud of, so you can actually choose one.
Sounds awesome.
Cool. Well, until next week, everyone, I'm Jared.
I'm Marcus.
And thank you for leveling with us.